Welcome to Cataclysmic Comics Backpack.
We're meeting in an abandoned cafe at the edge of a future catastrophe. My name is Ivan Kokmerek, and periodically I prepare a guest for an adventure into a desolate apocalyptic landscape, and I provide them with a knapsack into which they can place 5 comics or graphic novels of their choice to accompany them through oblivion. Their very difficult job is to make those choices.
Today's guest is James Waley, founder, creator of ORB Magazine, purveyor of a few gallery shows, of some con events, co-founder of the Schuster Awards. Welcome, James.
Well, thanks for having me, Ivan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, great. Well, we're here at our cafe at the end of the world. Can I get you something to drink?
Some uncontaminated water.
Okay, I've got my Pepsi, you've got your water. As far as I know, you were a Windsor kid, weren't you? That's where you were born and grew up.
Yeah, I grew up in Windsor. I moved 69-70 to Toronto. I moved after I graduated high school and came up to Toronto to go to the Ontario College of Art.
Let's back up a little bit, though, there.
Yep.
A kid in Windsor, what was the comic book world like there? And what was your first memory of a comic book sort of thing growing up in Windsor?
Well, I'll tell you, the first comics I can actually remember picking up, grade school I went to, was on Main Street in Windsor, Wyandotte Street. J.E. Benson. Up the street from there was a secondhand shop. Had everything. Had clothes, had radios, had old TVs, had everything under the sun, and had a big box, cardboard box of comics.
So it was sort of like a Value Village.
Yeah, it's sort of like that, but it was like just a junk shop. It had everything. And it was in a guy's house, and out front there was this crazy robot made out of like stovepipes and crazy stuff that he had erected out front, which was, a landmark. And back then, the place was maybe 4 or 5 blocks away from my grade school. And back then, parents didn't mind the kids roaming around. It was a more innocent time. So I would go up there and pick through this box of comics. And I think they were like 2 cents, 5 cents or whatever. They were really cheap in that, and they were all beat up. The ones I can remember picking up at that time, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say, was like Jimmy Olsen's, Lois Lane and that. I can remember the old Jimmy Olsen, the crazy stories like the Turtle Boy and
I remember that.
Elongated Lad and that.
But you shouldn't be embarrassed, because a kid's taste is not the sophisticated taste of an adult. I mean,
well, this is it. I'm maybe 10 or 12 years old, and I'm walking up the street, and these are the ones that attracted my attention. Yeah. Back then, the DC Comics had so many really crazy, wacky stories in that, Batman interacting with aliens and all the stuff in that. And, so that was the ones that attracted my attention at that time.
Yeah, I remember those well, too. So that was your first introduction.
Yeah.
Growing up and getting into high school, you said you came to Toronto for your high school. How did that come about?
No, I didn't. After I graduated high school, I came up to Toronto.
But did you have anything to do with illustration or comics during high school?
Well, actually, all during grade school and all during high school. I mean, I always took art. Actually, there was a library right across the street from my grade school. I used to enter art contests all the time. And there was a character in a book called Homer Price. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, I remember that.
There was a cover with this donut machine.
I remember the donut machine. They just kept spitting them out. I remember that was one of the books I picked up in grade school to read, too.
That's right. And I drew a picture of that cover. People accused me later of tracing it, but I guess I'd done such a good job of, duplicating that cover. I won first prize in the art contest. I got a copy of, I wish I still had it. I got a copy of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Really nice edition of that as the first prize. And I won a couple other, like second prize in other years. So I was always interested in art. And when I went to high school, to an all-boys school in Windsor called W.D. Lowe, and it had the best art program, renowned to have the best art program in Windsor. There were 2 teachers, Bert Weir and Bob Monks, and they were the 2 art teachers. Bob was more the commercial art, and Bert was more the fine art. Through those years of high school, and like I said, it was an all-boys school, though the art program was the only pretty well the only course in the school that admitted a few girls.
And now, did comics play anything more than a background role up to this point?
The Marvel stuff started to hit me probably in 62, 63, around there. Finding comics. I mean, there was a variety store in the corner where I lived. the Finding Comics, it was so piecemeal. It was like one here and one there.
Yeah, that's true.
There was really no place to specifically go to get issues. There were no comic shops, of course. Marvel really hit me harder than any other comics that were out there.
You came through high school. You still didn't work in comics or do anything yet. You finished high school. And is that when you went to Toronto and started at Sheridan?
Well, no, I went to Sheridan after I went to OCAD.
Oh, yeah. So you went to Toronto first.
I went to the art college. I was recommended by my art teachers in high school. Mm-hmm. The application, and had to send in samples and that, a portfolio thing, and fill out some stuff. And I got accepted and went to the art college. Unfortunately, when I went to the art college, the school was in a lot of turmoil at the time. There was a new president coming in, Roy Ascott, and he changed the school around a lot. There was a clean definition between commercial artwork and fine artwork when I went to the school, when I initially started there. Within the first year or two that I was there was a lot more melding of the two, and you could sort of put your own, you could take a little sculpture, you could take a little. The school was getting so political, so many people resisting this new president of the school. And I wanted structure. I mean, I wish I could say I could do my own, set up my own course the way I wanted to, plot my own course in that. But I really needed some outside structure, and the school was not giving that to me. So I was there for about 2 years, and then I had heard about a new course starting up at Sheridan College in Oakville. And this was a comic book course, comic book art course. And this guy, Walter Hansen, was starting it up. So I moved over to go to Sheridan and got in there and went to Sheridan for a year. And this was the very first year of the course.
Let me stop you for now, because I think we should mention your first pick. So you're getting ready to start at Sheridan, but what would your first pick be for your knapsack?
Well, I'm going to do these chronologically through the years. The first one that I would say would be the Fantastic Four number 51, came out in 1966, and it was the This Man, This Monster story.
Yeah, with the Thing right on the cover, sort of looking down.
That's right. Yeah, and on the very first page, which I think is actually more powerful than the cover, is him in a rainstorm.
Yeah, I remember that too.
And that story is a one and done. I mean, it's the Thing really feeling kind of dejected and sorry for himself. He's this misshapen guy, and he's wandering the streets, and he meets up with somebody who takes him in, and he has a bit of a similar physical structure to the Thing. So he takes over the Thing's basic form, and the Thing reverts back to Ben Grimm. You would think he'd be really happy to do that. But then he comes, the guy that took over his form comes to the Fantastic Four and comes to realize that all his jealousy, all his kind of hatred of Reed Richards and his success has been wrong. The guy is totally selfless. The guy is a hero. It's a story of realization about that guy's life and about what a real hero is about. And it's also about the Thing realizing he wasn't so bad off. I mean, it has so much scientific stuff in it, outer space stuff, but real human drama.
And that's what would come to your mind when you took it out of your backpack and got ready to read it?
Oh, of course.
The human sort of sensitivity balanced with the science.
Yeah, and Jack Kirby and Stan Lee together, and especially Jack Kirby. To me, that's the cornerstone of so much of what's gone forward since then in comics. I mean, I think those guys, they set the standard, and not many people have reached that since then. They were like and people have said this before, they were like the Lennon-McCartney of comics.
Well, that's a good analogy, yeah. So you've got that first pick, FF51. Now let's get back to your story of coming to maturity and how you got into art.
Well, I went to Sheridan College after 2 years of the art college, and I went there for a year, but like I said, it was the formative year. It was the the embryonic year of the comic art course. It was chaotic also. I'd come out of one chaotic situation into school into another one. It was really not well formed. The teacher that was heading it up was an English teacher, and really you could tell after a few months of taking the course that so much of what was behind doing the course for him was to bring in his comic book heroes, Will Eisner, Bernie Wrightson, Neil Adams, and that, and have sessions with them and get them over and wine and dine them, get them to sign books for him and do artwork and stuff. And the course was really not hanging together that well. I got involved with the student magazine that year. It was called A Magazine, which is a good name for a Canadian magazine, though it was not EH, it was the letter A. I designed the logo for the magazine, and I was the art director for the magazine. I lined up comic strips from other artists that I worked with, that I was going to school with at the time, and set up the whole magazine and did the graphic design of it. After 1 year in the course...
And this is around 72, 73?
Yeah, about 73. I didn't feel the course was progressing well enough. It went on for a few more years, then they just went strictly back to animation at Sheridan. But after 1 year in working on the magazine, I guess I kind of got the publishing bug and talked to a number of my friends that I knew at Sheridan and a few friends that I made at the art college that were into comics. And we all pooled our money and thought, let's put out a magazine. Let's put a comic together ourselves.
Who were some of those guys that were at art college with you at Sheridan?
Paul McCusker, Don Marshall, John Allison, who I went to the art college with, the Ontario College of Art. Matt Rust, of course, and a number of us. And for the first issue, I think it was only somewhere around $75 each, and put together the first issue. It was magazine sized, it was black and white, and it was kind of modeled along the lines of the Warren magazines in the sense it was not comic book size, it was magazine size and black and white on newsprint.
Things like creepy and eerie and...
Yeah, but we had a wider range than that. We were doing...
Your content seemed to be more like heavy metal rather than the horror mag.
I guess so, yeah. But we were open to pretty well anything. We were open to humor. We were open to fantasy. We were open to science fiction, superhero, right across the board a little bit, maybe to our detriment because it didn't have a real strong specific focus. We were trying to be something for everybody, and that doesn't always work.
But with this first issue of ORB, I hope people realize that what a breakthrough it was. You were bringing comics back to the mainstream, to the newsstand, after they'd been away for a generation when the whites ended in 46 after the war. There was really nothing from Canada until ORB came out and hit the stands.
Well, it was 74, and I must correct you as far as hitting the stands, because at the time, for the first issue, our outlet was Bud Plant, was Phil Sewling in the States.
Oh, I didn't realize it. So it was like mail order and...
Well, we would bring copies to them, and they would get it into shops that were starting up then, or into what were referred to as head shops at the time, where underground comics were being distributed. But in Canada, the first 3 issues, I don't think made it into the actual variety stores, which is pretty well about the only place where comics were available at that time. There wasn't a lot in the way of specialty shops.
No, I didn't realize that. I thought right from issue 1 they were on the stand, so that's a good piece of information to learn.
Well, we got a newsstand distributor, Pentamas, a company in Oakville, as of issue 4, I think it was. And so 4, 5, and 6 made it into stores. But unfortunately, that was a bit of our undoing at the time also, because the distributor that we got was more of a local distributor with high hopes of going national, going all across the country. And we were, I guess, a bit of an experiment for him, shipping out to Winnipeg, shipping out to Vancouver and for us. And as it turns out, and I guess, just like anything to do with distribution or that sort of thing, there's a lot of, shall we say, under or crooked dealing possibly, with that. And in a lot of the cities we got into, what we heard after the fact was that a lot of the boxes came back to him, came back to our distributor unopened, because they were bigger distributors, full-fledged national distributors who did not want to see our books on the stands because they took out shelf space that they wanted their own books up on. So that really hurt us because when we were doing it through Bud Plan and through Phil Sewell, we were totally selling out. They bought everything that we printed. And our print runs weren't really that big in the beginning. They got bigger as we went on. But as the print runs got bigger and the distribution got wider, we were getting so many returns. And returns not because they went unsold, because they didn't even get on the shelves. You can only bleed that sort of stuff for so long.
Well, I'm glad you got that help from Bud and some of the other distributors and got it out there through North America that way. But maybe you can answer one question for me. I've always had trouble. I still don't have a copy of issue 1. All the other ones I can get. But number 1 seems to be harder to find. Was it just such a smaller print run?
I think the first one, I could be wrong. I'd have to look in the records, and probably Matt Russ would know better. And I think it was only a print run of like 1,500 copies or so, or 1,000 copies. I personally, and I'm embarrassed to say, I only have about, I think, 4 copies of my own.
So ORB went for a 6-issue run in the end.
Yeah.
And one of the characters you created in ORB, co-created, I guess, with Jim Craig, was the most famous one. That's the Northern Light. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the Northern Light actually started as a spec script, something that's unsolicited.
Sort of like a pitch.
Yeah, it was a spec script actually done by T.K.C. Brennan.
Oh, yeah.
Did a lot of work for the Warren magazines. And T.K.C. had done this spec script for Charlton, and it was for E-Man, the character E-Man that Nicola Cuddy and Joe Staton did. I guess he sent it to Charlton and asked, here's a script for E-Man, what do you think? And they said, well, the guys that do it, the guy that writes it and the guy that draws it, they don't need outside stuff. They're doing it themselves. And so he had the script hanging around. John Allison, I got to know him, I think, through a convention he met him at, T.K.C. Brennan. Casey had the script on hand. He said, I wrote this for E-Man. You want to do this as a superhero book or a superhero story at ORB? And John took it and said, sure, yeah, we'd love to have your work in our book. Now, at the time, it was just kind of a generic superhero story. Mm-hmm. And it was intended for E-Man. When it came to us, we obviously had to call it something else. Initially, I was asking T.K.C. what he wanted to change it to. And he said, well, call him the Phantom Canadian. And I said, nah, I don't think that works. And then he got back to me and he said, we're talking on the phone about this. And he said, well, how about the White Light? And I said, well, and then I put my hand over the phone and I yelled over to my wife at the time. And I said, he wants to call it the White Light. And there was a moment of silence and she yells back, nah, not the White. How about the Northern Light? I said, perfect. That works. So I said that to TKC and he said, yeah, okay, go with that, the Northern Light. But like I said, the first story, and we broke it into 2 parts.
The Northern Light didn't begin till issue 2, did it?
That's right. And like I said, John Allison, who brought the script to us from TKC, he drew the first episode and it was our first color section. The first issue of ORB was all black and white. The second issue had a color section, which, like I said, was sort of molded, along the idea of Warren. Warren had all black and white and then a color section in the middle. So we thought, hey, that kind of works because we couldn't afford to do a whole color book. So John Allison did the first chapter and then Jim Craig did the second chapter.
Well, how about your second pick now, James? You picked FF51 to go in the knapsack. What would you pick for your second pick?
Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. #1.
Yeah.
It was Scorpio with that classic cover with all the building blocks. As much as Jack Kirby and Stan Lee blew me away when I first was aware of their stuff, Jim Steranko, again, was somebody who in his output in comics is so finite, just a limited number of books that he's done, and on to so many other things, working on movies and putting out a Premiere magazine and other stuff about movies and other stuff. But his work on S.H.I.E.L.D., on Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., was just monumental. I mean,
groundbreaking, yeah.
Yeah, seismic. The repercussions through the field because of what he did on S.H.I.E.L.D. are still, just reverberating to this day. He worked for a few issues with Jack Kirby, laying the stuff out. And then it was like he was fully formed. And that first issue he wrote and he illustrated it. And it had movie influence and it had surrealistic painting. It had so many influences and it all meshed into this perfect. Steranko is one of the few artists who there is almost nothing name on on the fingers of one hand. The few things I've ever seen that Jim Steranko has drawn, created, that didn't impress me. But everything that he's done in his entire career has been impressive, just awe-inspiring.
And I think the collector's market recognizes that, because the Steranko issue is very sought after and very valuable.
And he's the artist. He's the artist that so many other artists look to as inspiration. Somebody who just shook it up. He shook up what was happening in comics at the time. It needed that shaking up. It needed somebody who would come in, talk about how the stuff was going to be colored, talk about how the stuff was going to be laid out, everything. I mean, he came at it from so many different angles.
That's a good word, because he had perspective angles as well as different story angles and visual angles. It was very cinematic.
Oh yeah, of course. Jim Steranko, he was so perfectly himself. You look at a Jim Steranko piece, you can see it a mile away. It's so perfectly him. And there's only a few artists like that. Kirby, obviously, Barry Wrights, and a few other people whose work you look at, it's unmistakable.
And I think you're so right in pointing out that there are certain events or certain occurrences that seem to elevate the status and the artistic aesthetic of what comics are.
Oh, yeah.
Kirby did, and I think Steranko was one of them. People like Barry Smith, like Frank Miller, it seems to be happening more now because there seem to be so many more good artists. Back there, it was really noticeable and significant because it would be different from everything else that was around.
Well, I'll tell you, it's the sort of thing like a seismic occurrence of his stuff coming up. Like I was in a band, in a rock band when I was in high school with a few friends and that. And when the Beatles stuff was coming up back then, when Sgt. Pepper came out.
Yeah.
And I remember down the street from me, one of the guys in my band, Jerry, we sat on his front porch. We had the little record player there, and we're playing Sgt. Pepper over and over again. And it was like literally, and I don't mean to be sacrilegious, but it was like deliverance from the gods. It was like it impressed you so much, and it just broke from so much stuff that had come before.
Yeah.
And Sgt. Pepper is that, and I think Steranko is that.
Yeah, I agree. So this is your second pick, and now you're finishing up at you're still at art at Sheridan and going through the program.
Sheridan, I did 1 year, and like I said, I got involved with the magazine. I got to know, paste up and setting up the magazine and stuff like that, the school magazine. And then I thought, well, let's do our own. And then we went off.
Well, there were another bunch of people, too, that worked on the magazine. People like George Henderson, Vince Marchesano, Art Cooper.
Yes, yeah.
A whole lot of people got their start there and produced a whole bunch of good work that people should dig out and try and find.
Well, George Henderson was like a mentor of ours during the time, wrote 4 great scripts for the magazine. I think in the last issue that we produced, issue number 6, The Flame of El Haman, that Bill Payne illustrated. Bill Payne had been doing stuff, or was starting to do stuff for DC Comics at the time. And I think that is like the cherry on top of everything we did during ORB. That story and that artwork is like the high point of anything we did during that time. I mean, George had been involved in some publishing on his own, and had been a writer in the past. He was the only game in town, really, when it came to comic retailing and comic knowledge in Toronto when I first moved to Toronto. I mean, things expanded quite a bit after that. George really got the ball rolling.
Now, I remember he started off some of the earliest cons in the street in front of his shop.
That's right.
You also got involved in some cons as well. I think you did some at OCAD, some one-day cons.
I was working at Dragon Lady Comics. I was the manager of Dragon Lady Comics after Dave DeRigo was the manager there. Dave was getting out of working at the shop, suggested that I take over for him, which I did.
And what year would this be around?
This would have been around 84, 85, 86, around there. I was there for a couple years as manager. And along with managing the shop, I put on some conventions for the shop. The shop was doing a convention called TowerCon. And as manager, I started putting together the logistics of the TowerCons for them. So I think I did 3, maybe 4 TowerCons. So, after a couple years of working for them, I broke away from that, and they were winding down as far as doing conventions. I was interested interested in the whole convention thing. So from about, late 80s, maybe a year or two into the 90s, I put on conventions in Toronto. We did them in London, Ontario. We did them in Windsor, Ontario. We put on about 30, 35, I think, altogether conventions. All pretty well, I think they were all one-day conventions. And, I had a whole range of people, Adam Hughes, Mark Nelson, who worked on the original Alien comics, and Jim Lee, and a whole number of people at the conventions. So that went on for a few years, but we were really surviving from one convention to the next. They were making okay money, but they were just like made enough to put on the next one and earn a little bit of income from it.
The convention scene was quite different back then than what it's become now. What did you learn from doing those conventions? There probably was no cosplay,
no cosplay,
no big names, picture signings.
No, and plus, we would not at the time. People like Jim Lee and other people. I mean, we got Todd McFarlane. I got Todd McFarlane actually for the Tower Cons when we were doing them through Dragon Lady. But the guests were not asking for an appearance fee. They came strictly. We paid their accommodation. We paid their transportation. Flew them in, flew them back, and we gave them a little bit of spending money as far as if they wanted to have food at the hotel or whatever and that. But beyond that, they were on their own. I mean, it's become like everything. I mean, it's become huge business since then. And now everybody, you line up forever to get $50 or whatever. And there was none of that. Everybody signed everything for free. Back then, lots of them did sketches for free. No, it was a whole different world back then. And and it's just, to me, it's become way too commercialized since then.
Yeah, I agree.
But that's, big business is the whole thing that's gotten into it. The fact that these people generate properties that become mega billion-dollar films. So, there's all that plays into it. So I guess it's understandable that it went that way. But it's like anything. It's even the whole fandom thing.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about this, but there was a time when, now it's acceptable to be, a geek, to be a nerd, to be into all the comic books and science fiction films or whatever in that. But back then we were outsiders.
Oh yeah, nerds.
Yeah, exactly. And actually I didn't mind that time, because so many of the people who have gotten into it now they just like the surface quality of the whole thing. They're not really deeply into it. They just think it's the flavor of the week sort of thing, to do that sort of thing, to be into that. So I guess it's great as far as the economy that's come out of it, the big bucks that creators make and that. But still, there was an innocence back then.
Yeah, and you had to work at getting things. You had to find things. It wasn't just everywhere. I guess one thing that's good is that it's raised the quality and the amount of work that's out there in terms of comic books up, so it's permeating the society, but it's missing some of the heart that it used to have.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay, how about now your third pick, James? Is it another seismic occurrence in comics?
Well, seismic in the sense of the creators that worked on it. It's 1972 now. My third pick would be Batman 244. The Demon Lives Again. It was actually, I think, the last part of a 3-part story. This is Neil Adams. This is Denny O'Neil. It was a period of Batman being accepted as a character that really could interact in the real world. I mean, they actually Neil Adams showed in this issue Batman with his shirt off, hairy-chested Batman, kissing this woman and that. And it's like, whoa, is Batman like a real person or whatever in that? I mean, and his style of artwork, again, very much like Jim Steranko, rippled through the industry in such a way to influence so many people. I mean, he brought commercial illustration, realistic stuff into the comic field that almost nobody else could even touch at the time. When you look back at his Ben Casey comic strips, this man had the goods. He still is an amazing artist now, and I think he's he's almost 80 or so, or he's really getting up there, and he can still produce amazing stuff. I wish he would let other people write his stuff these days, but back then with Denny O'Neil, I mean, the stuff that they did on Batman, I mean, there was a character that had languished for so long, there'd been the TV show, there'd been so many comedic sort of takes on Batman, and then Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams bring it right to gritty realism. That stuff was just so impressive.
And it was a break with a camp sense of Batman that we'd become in the mid-'60s and through the late '60s. That Ra's al Ghul sort of trilogy and Batman as a human being.
Exactly. I mean, that everything that came after that, Frank Miller, anything that anybody did after that, was all a reflection of what Denny and Neil brought to it. That gritty realism that you wouldn't see Batman. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but you wouldn't see Batman working in the broad daylight. He'd be a creature of the night, he'd be so noir.
Yeah. Well, what I see in your first three picks is you tend to go for things that show human beings in comics, the human being side of all the heroes. Ben Grimm's side, Nick Fury's sort of artistic thing where he's depicted as somebody real rather than just a comic book character. The bare-chested Batman who's getting beat up by Ra's al Ghul.
Well, to me, when I was saying about Neil Adams, the work that he's producing now, anything that Neil puts out these days, it seems like, and I always have a feeling that he's kind of trying to live up to what the Image guys brought out in the early days, and that he's trying to be as bombastic as these guys were. In the days when he was working with Denny O'Neil on stuff, there was peaks and valleys, there was human drama, there was action, there was levels through it. That to me is what a good story is about.
Yeah.
The story I mentioned, the Fantastic Four story, This Man, This Monster, it's not just a in-your-face action thing with science fiction. It's human drama. And if you don't get that into a story, if you don't feel for the characters, to me, then it's just all smoke and mirrors. It's just razzle dazzle.
Okay, so mid-'80s, you're putting on cons. Was it around this time you did that Propeller Art Gallery show that I remember?
I think it was in the mid-'90s.
Mid-'90s. Oh, okay, I've got a decade out of place. But something I'd like to find out more about that, if you could speak about how that came about, the Propeller Art Gallery show.
Well, it had to do with a lady that I was going out with at the time. She worked at that gallery. She was one of the
curators?
Curators, exactly. Yeah, she was one of the curators at the gallery.
Where is that gallery?
It was down on Queen Street near Ossington, just a block or so east of Ossington. And so she worked at the Propeller, and as we, were a couple and talked about comics and all kinds of things, and she was drawing comics also. Ruth Tate, she's an amazing artist. She's a fine artist, and she's done a lot of comic work too. So we got talking about why not, she works at this gallery, why don't we put on a show there? And we called it POP, and it was PPOP. It was panels, paintings, and other pursuits. And what we wanted to show was how these people that did comic books or comic strips could also have a well-rounded artistic output and produce other things. So we showed Jerry Lazar's commercial work, big things he did for magazines and stuff he did for jazz. I think he did some stuff for jazz albums, and other people that not only did comic books, but did animation or did sculpture or other things. It was an amazingly well-received show. In fact, one of the guys, Scott Cooper, whose artwork was in the show, a comic book artist, he showed other facets of himself because he had a band at the time, and the band was set up the night that we launched the show, and they produced music for the event. So no, it was one of the most, from what I heard from the gallery, from the people that actually own the gallery, it was one of the best received shows that they'd ever had. It resulted in me breaking up with the girl that I was going with at the time who was there. Well, she was one of the curators, and I wasn't. So she felt that she knew better how to put the stuff on the walls and set up the stuff. And I just found a lot of the stuff was mixing stuff in the wrong way, so I kind of overrode anyways. Such is life.
What can you tell me about Ed Furness and what his contribution to the show was? What kind of a guy was he?
Oh, Ed was amazing. Ed became a fine art painter. We put a couple paintings of his, really beautifully framed paintings of his landscape stuff that he did.
Now, for people who don't know, Ed Furness worked for AA Comics, and he was one of the artistic creators of Freelance, for example.
That's right. I was visiting Ed at the time at a retirement home where he was, and arranging with him and his daughter to get access to these paintings to put in the show. And we were showing reproductions of Freelance also. He didn't have any freelance artwork, of course, but we had reproductions that we put up to show his range of stuff and what he had gone on to. I felt so privileged to get to know Ed. And I remember distinctly the very last time I saw him at the retirement home, and I think it might have been only a few months before he passed away. And he was in a wheelchair, and I was just about to leave that day from visiting with him. I think we were bringing the paintings back. We were dropping them off with him. He's sitting in his wheelchair as I'm about to leave, and he pulls me down to within earshot, and he whispers in my ear, and he says, "James, don't get old."
He's right. He's right.
But still, the alternative is better than...
Yeah, that's true. Now, James, you made a lot of good contacts, being at Sheridan, starting up ORB, doing the cons. Somebody you haven't talked about you made contact with is Dave Sim, for example.
Dave Sim, yes. Dave came on as my associate editor around the time of the last issue of ORB. Going forward, he was going to stay on as assistant editor. Matt Russ had departed. I actually had parted ways with Matt because Matt was infuriating a number of the creators that were working for the magazine. So I found I had to work with so many of the creators that were doing work for the magazine because they didn't want to work with Matt. So I brought Dave Sim on.
And this would have been before Cerebus came out, just before.
Definitely, yeah. And in fact, I had assigned to Dave Sim to work on a series we were going to base on Alibaba. Dave did layouts for the first chapter of that and did a story treatment for it. And at the time, we were bleeding money at the time, as I said, because of the distribution situation we were in. And we were looking around for partners to hook up with to help us out to continue. We went to there was actually a guy that was running a leather shop in Toronto, curing leather and producing leather goods, and that Topper was. And he was a big comic collector. I knew him through Silver Snail. We talked to him and discussed the possibility of him becoming a financial silent partner with us. That didn't work out. We went to Heritage, I can't remember the name, the company in Montreal.
Oh, yeah.
It was producing French-Canadian versions of the Marvel comics, reprinting them in Quebec. And we had some good discussions with them, but that didn't pan out. And then basically it ran out of gas. We couldn't continue. And Dave went off and started up Cerebus within a year or maybe 2 years after he was associated with ORB. He did an issue of, I think it was Cerebus Archive after Cerebus wrapped up after the 300th issue. But in this Cerebus Archive, I think it was, he did a full issue on the things he learned not to do with Cerebus from working at ORB. It was like a big section of this whole magazine about, I learned don't do it in color, have no color. And others, and do it all by yourself, and on and on. So, like I said, Dave took a lot of lessons away from what we did and what we did wrong. And actually, a number of the story ideas he was going to produce for the Alibaba strip went directly into Cerebus. So Cerebus really, I don't want to take more credit than is due for that, but Cerebus in a lot of ways wouldn't have happened without his experience with ORB, because it gave him a grounding of, this is how you work on and this is how you don't work on a magazine, and this is how you could do it on your own, and these are ideas that I came up with at the time. And it all evolved into Cerebus. I mean, Dave and I are still good friends over the years. He's a character, but he's got such a kind heart that a lot of people don't realize about him. I mean, he comes off really gruff a lot of times. He comes off argumentative. He comes off controversial, to say the least. I mean, I accept Dave warts and all. There are a lot of things about him I wish he'd change, a lot of his opinions about women and that. But Dave's come to my rescue on a few occasions at some really low points. And, I really treasure his friendship.
Yeah, he didn't hesitate in helping me out with my Kickstarter with a few signed prints to
Exactly.
help it up. So I feel the same way. Now, can we ask you now for your fourth pick?
Okay, my fourth pick would be 1973 from Marvel, Conan number 24, the Song of Red Sonja.
Oh, yeah.
And again, like I was saying about Neil Adams or about Steranko, Barry Smith at the time, but Barry Windsor Smith really came into his own around that time. I mean, he had shown a lot of promise before. He kind of looked a little Kirby, a little like this, a little like that. But when he did that issue of the Song of Red Sonja, I mean, he just blossomed into this talent that is so formidable. He brought, that kind of romantic Renaissance kind of feeling to comics. There were so many other people that were inspired by that. I mean, I love to see guys that, like I said, that you look at a Barry Windsor Smith piece and you just know it from across the room. You can see what he's bringing to his artwork that nobody else really touches. It's such an identifiable style. And it's interesting too, because you look at, the variations of what he was doing before that, but then when he comes into his own, he's distilled all that stuff into this perfect, Barry Windsor Smith style that's so identifiable after that.
And what would this issue give you if you pulled it out of the knapsack as well?
Well, I mean, Conan, I loved the Conan character, and Conan also with the Red Sonja character then. Here was a guy who was so forthright and macho and, going his own way, and then he's shown up by this woman. And there was a nice balance there where, he got his ass kicked. She really, she stood on her own in that. I love the dynamics of it. I mean, it was just such a freewheeling sort of thing. And the whole thing of bringing, Robert E. Howard bringing the character into the comic world. I mean, that character, as much as there was a certain amount of following in the paperbacks and stuff before then, when it came into the comics, boom, I mean, Conan just exploded everywhere. And then Schwarzenegger and everything else, all the other things that came from that.
That was around the time of women's libs starting to come out properly too, wasn't it?
And Red Sonja, was a big, I'm sure, influenced a lot of, I mean, they talk about Wonder Woman and that, but Red Sonja was, on equal footing with Conan. And again, when you look at Dave Sim, and like I said, I mean, I love Dave like a brother. I mean, he's such a sweet guy, but I'm reminded of this term that Sybil Shepherd used with the character in Taxi Driver from a song, Walking Contradiction. I mean, as much as Dave Sim rails against mainstream comics and stuff, and and how they put creators through the meat grinder and all this stuff and other things and unfairness, and there's a lot of that's true. Dave Sim's career, so much of his career is based on, I mean, Cerebus, in effect, is a send-up of Conan. The stuff he's doing lately, he's sending up Batman, and he's sending up this, and he's sending, I mean, as much as he rails against the big two about DC or Marvel or whatever, he couldn't exist without the stuff that he sort of makes fun of them.
No, I agree. Now, you also did at least one full comic for Charlton, didn't you? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was called Blood, the Ultimate Barbarian, spelled B-L-U-D-D.
And which year was this?
It was 82, I think it was.
82, that early, wow.
It came out the same year that Gene Day passed away, and I think that was 80.
Oh.
At the time, Charlton had Charlton Bullseye, which was like a tryout book. They were asking for people to send in submissions to be published in this. We weren't going to get paid for it. We were going to get copies of the book when it came out. And they brought out 11 issues, I think it was, altogether. So I sent in a proposition to them. And Gene Day at the time, when we first started up the stuff for Blood, Gene had done an initial bit of stuff for Blood when we were doing ORB. And that's what was originally going to be published. Sorry. It was going to be published in the 7th issue of ORB. We got up to...
Because I remember an ad on the back of the 6th issue for it.
That's right. The 6th issue we advertised for the 7th issue, and Blood was going to be in that. Gene had done the very first chapter of it. It was going to go in the 7th issue. 7th issue never came out, so that laid in my filing cabinet for a long time. And then when this opportunity came up at Charlton, I thought, well, let's dust that off and see what we can do with that. And Gene at that time was working for Marvel, was going to start doing work for DC. So we had a chapter already done. We showed it to people at Charlton. They loved what they saw. Of course, it was Gene Day's stuff. They said, okay, make a full issue of it. So we got Vince Marchesano, do a chapter. We got Peter Sue, this guy Peter Iro, who I wish I'd know where he is these days, but he was in Buffalo.
How do you spell that last name?
IRO. Peter Iro was very well known in a lot of the fanzines, doing all kinds of stuff. Great letter, great inker, great artist, really. And he inked Vince's, and he inked Peter Sue's and lettered those 2 chapters. And Vince did the cover of it, which Gene was kind enough at the time, Gene Day, to ink the cover. And there was a few things in the first chapter that Gene had done initially for ORB that we needed to change just to work it into the full story. And Vince drew some new panels, which Gene inked to match up with the whole look of the first chapter. Yeah, it was to see that come out in print in a color comic out on the newsstands, and that was really a thrill. And I wish I hadn't overwritten it so much at the time. I mean, I tried to cram so much stuff in it. You know, you live and learn. No, it was a great experience. And a lot of people I still see on Facebook all over the place, a lot of fandom that still chime in occasionally saying, hey, I picked up this old issue of Charlton Blood. Man, I wish, I love that issue and that. And there's still hope if I can get Vince on board. He's busy with a number of other things, but we're still looking at doing some more with the Blood character. I've got a script that I wrote. Actually, it turns out there was a character called Baroness Van Blood at Charlton, which I didn't know about. And her last name, Blood, is spelled the same as Blood the Barbarian. I worked out a story where she kind of thinks, because she's a vampire and she lives into the future and Blood's based in the future, she kind of thinks she might be related to him. There's a little story that we worked out with those characters.
I'd love to see something like that come out.
Well, if I can get Vince to do it.
Can I ask you now for your last pick? You've got 4 great picks. I'd like to find out what your last pick is, James.
Well, we're going to jump all the way to 1986. And I hate to be a cliche in this sense, but it's Watchmen. If I can only pick one issue, it would probably have been the 6th issue of Watchmen, which is The Abyss Gazes also, and is the episode that basically is built around Rorschach. To me, that particular issue of Watchmen, what it reminds me of in that is, the character Rorschach was probably in some ways the most despicable character in the Watchmen, but also the most wounded one of all of them. And he reminds me in a lot of ways, it may seem like a tangent, but sometimes you'll pass somebody on the street and they're asking for a handout or whatever, and that, and you might dismiss them out of hand. You walk past, and I hate to admit it, but I've probably done it many times myself. And you kind of misjudge what they're about, and you don't know their backstory. You don't know what brought them to that point in their life. Whereas you look at the Rorschach character in that Watchmen story, and he grew up, his mother was a prostitute, he was slapped around as a kid, he was discarded as a person. And a lot of those aspects is what brought him to where he is in that story that day. To me, that's that sort of human drama, that those layers under the surface quality of what that character's about, that I can appreciate. I can appreciate, just knowing that there's more to the character than just an interesting costume and just the way the character interacts with the other characters. To know all that backstory, I find that as interesting as, the stuff that's right in your face than anything. So anyways, Watchmen. And I know Watchmen, is on so many people's lists and that, but again, Alan Moore, what can I say? I mean, Alan Moore's stuff, as the saying goes, blew my hair back. I mean, he just, but Alan Moore, just brought such an intensity to the comics industry. And just a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of just high quality writing in that. I mean, I did not like everything that Alan did, but the stuff I liked that he did just knocked me out. I mean, and his output, just, it's stunning. I mean, it's like he's cloned himself, for half a dozen people or so, because his scripts, and I've heard legendary stuff about his scripts, for one page, he would write 5 or 6 pages of text describing in minute detail everything in the room and that to the artist and that. And the thing is with his scripts, I've also heard that why he did that in a way was that if they only delivered 25 or 30% of what he put into those 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 pages of description, then he would still get as much as he would have wanted for the story. And he always told artists, again, it's another thing that's legendary, he always said, you're the visual creator of this. Run with it the way you want to, and I'm sure whatever you deliver, what I put down here is not carved in stone. Just an immense talent. I feel so bad that he's walked away from comics. So much of the stuff that's been done with his materials since then, by DC, by Warner Brothers. Picking over the bones of the stuff that he did in the past shows such a lack of creativity by a lot of people who should come up with their own good stuff. They treated him badly, and then they want to run with so much stuff that he's created in the past. To me, it's unfair, but that's a whole other story.
Well, your picks, all 5 of them seem to center around good character, good storytelling, and great art, all combined into each one of those issues. Of those 5 books, what we usually ask now is if you could save only one of them in the backpack and you had to get rid of the other 4, which one of those 5 issues would you save?
My first choice, the FF51.
Yeah.
Yeah. What Jack and Stan created together, that melding of those two talents, they set the template for so much of what's gone on since then. There wouldn't be an industry the way it is today if they hadn't done what they did. Stan and Jack, to my sensibilities, what interests me in comics, characterization, that family dynamic in the Fantastic Four, science fiction, the adventure and everything. No, that's the one I would take.
You're right, because prior to that, the writing in comics seemed to be such two-dimensional stuff. Stories of battles and fights and monsters and things like that. Exactly.
You could interchange what one character said to another. Green Arrow would say the same thing that Batman would say, the same thing that the Flash would say, or whatever. When the Fantastic Four started to happen, the Thing was saying this, and Johnny Storm was this way, and
they weren't cutouts; they were human beings. Yeah, no, I agree with that. Well, before we wrap up, I'd like to ask you about stuff that you're doing now. Is there anything you want to share with us about what's going on now and might come out in the future?
Well, I am working on a biographical book on Captain George Henderson. I'm working on that with 2 other creators, Rob Lamberti, who's a crime reporter for the Toronto Sun and a big comic fan, and Alan Sant, who is an amazing graphic designer. And we're putting together a book about George Henderson. George, I think, had a seismic effect in Toronto as far as comic book fandom and comic book collecting and stuff, and had a big impact in my life. I've always wanted to bring to the general public those accomplishments of George, and there's other aspects about George too, which, well, when the whole thing comes together, you'll see what we present. But I'm excited about the book.
Oh yeah, I think it's a much needed work because of the role he played in the 60s,
for sure.
70s, and he was just all over media, bringing pop culture to everybody and saying there's something here that has to be looked at.
I mean, not only for collectors and aficionados, fandom and that of comics, but creators of comics in Canada. I think the influence of George's shop and the influence of how the medium was coming into its own, they wouldn't have thought to go forward. I mean, myself with ORB Magazine, I mean, George had such a great influence on writing spectacular scripts for us and just encouraging us to no end. I mean, George was our biggest cheerleader for the whole thing. So there's that. I've also been trying to get off the ground Northern Light Compendium, which hopefully we'll do a Kickstarter for next year. And that would be about 120 pages. It would collect all the material that's and done with the Northern Light, clean up some of the flaws in the way stuff was printed before. We might be looking at doing the stuff that was black and white stories in color. There's a lot of unpublished stuff that other
That would be great to see.
Ken Stacy and a number of other people have done some Northern Light drawings and that in the past. All that stuff would be collected together. So yeah, I wanted to see a compendium of that. And then also going beyond that, I'm hoping that my old creative partner on the Northern Light, Jim Craig, and I will get together and produce some new material for the Northern Light going forward. And again, I think Kickstarter, maybe, I like the sort of template of Hellboy, which Matt Mignola. Mignola did with Hellboy, which is rather than monthly churning out stuff, nice little like 6-issue limited series that come out. Then there's maybe a pause between that, maybe 6 or 8 months, and then another 6 or 8 issue series, and then those collected. To me, it's a more frees up creators to do their best work rather than just trying to pump out, meet a deadline every month and stuff and that. And also possibly, and this is the way the world is going as far as the actual publication of the stuff, maybe seeing those issues, the limited series come out online, Comixology or whatever, and then the only thing seeing print is when they're collected together after that and put into a trade paperback and collected volume.
Well, I'd look forward to all 3 of those projects. I wish you success in them.
Oh, thank you.
Well, let's see, we've got you with your backpack and your 5 books in there.
Okay.
Let's open the front door of the cafe and show you the desolate vista you're going to head into. We'll give you one more thing, because I always like to see what people will say. We'll give you one superpower you can choose to take with you.
I would say super strength, and I would hope super strength would combat a number of aspects of getting older, arthritis or whatever, and that super strength to get through the older years.
Yeah.
There's also something else you mentioned in some of the other sessions, one luxury.
Oh, yeah. Why did I forget about that? Yeah, one little luxury that doesn't have any sort of usefulness to it, but something you'd like to take along with you.
Okay, if I was there and I was by myself in an apocalyptic situation, and that the one luxury I would like is just maybe a tablet or something that I could see a video on, and maybe just one video, and that would actually be a birthday video that my daughter did in the last year, in this coronavirus year for my birthday, with a lot of people, my son, his family, my daughter. You were in the video.
Oh, yeah.
That to comfort me through the apocalyptic years and that. But that would be the one luxury I would like, is to have that, to be able to see the people that mean a lot to me.
What a great choice. And I hope you'd be able to find a place to charge that each time so you wouldn't run out after a couple of days.
It has a solar panel on it.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Well, James, that brings us to the end. Thanks for doing this with us. I found out a lot about you that I didn't know, and I hope other people will look into your work a bit more. Thanks for being part of this.
Well, thank you for asking me, Ivan. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and it's always, a pleasure to reminisce about stuff and that. And I mean, I have the highest respect for the stuff that you've produced in the past. And, we got projects, which we won't talk about here, but things in mind in the future that will.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks again.
Thank you, James. Thanks very much.
Take care.